We're breaking down the Gophers wide receiver room. Is it one of the best in the Big Ten? We're going to debate that and give you our top or our Big Ten rankings when it comes to the wide receiver position.
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You are listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And we're going position by position and breaking down each group. We're talking about potential starters, future pieces, the depth players, and so much more. And then we're ranking the room across the Big Ten each and every day. Today, we're covering wide receivers. So if you want to catch every single position breakdown, you're going to want to be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube and follow wherever you get the podcast. I appreciate y'all. I love that the channel is building up. We're getting some comments down below as well. And you know what? I was at practice yesterday, so we'll talk a little bit about some of the insights, but there weren't a lot of gatherings from yesterday. But yesterday at practice, I did get to meet an everydayer. So shout out to Barry, who is often in the comments. I appreciate you for listening, and it was great to talk ball and officially meet you yesterday. I also got to speak with Brian Carroll, which was a pleasure. Now, quick takeaways on yesterday's practice before we talk about the wide receiver room, because could this be the most talented Gophers wide receiver room in Coach Fleck's time here? I think it's possible, and I'm going to tell you why, but let's talk about the quick blips of yesterday's practice first. Now, there wasn't a whole lot to take from the practice overall. Ethan didn't have any throws in practice, only practiced on the running downs. And then Tyler Newman didn't play at all. Coach Fleck, when asked about it in the pressers after, said that the trainers decided they wanted to have both of them have a rest sort of day due to the data and all of the snaps that they'd taken so far in camp, and that they would be full go again tomorrow, aka today. So nothing too concerning there as far as what we've been given. I wouldn't be too concerned either, because if Ethan was injured in any sort of capacity, they wouldn't have him out there practicing on the run snaps and things like that either. It just doesn't make sense to continue to put him in any sort of situation or predicament where he could get further injured or anything else tweaked or anything by compensating. So I didn't have too much concern with that overall. But moving on beyond that, the only real insights I had, the defensive line has impressed me at every single practice, including yesterday's. They were blowing up the run game. They're giving the offensive line some issues to handle, and it was brought up in the presser after. I mean, we heard a lot about Anthony Smith. Now, if you've been listening to the show every day since last year, we've been going for a year now. If you've been listening, you know I am a major fan of Anthony Smith. I think this dude is going to be the truth. Both him and Devin Eastern are kind of my guys. I think they're going to be absolute chaotic managers, game changers for the Gophers in the Big Ten. I am excited by this defensive line room. If there are two rooms that I am most excited for when it comes to the Gophers, it's the defensive line and it's the wide receivers. Now, we're breaking down the wide receivers today, so you're going to find out why I like this room so much. But the other two things that I noticed in that last practice open to the public is that the offensive line battle looks to still be going at the right tackle and the left guard positions. You know what? It has to be decided sooner than later, because you're getting to those later stages in camp. Next week, they'll have one more week of kind of more strenuous individual looking inward practicing. And then after that, it'll be more of a bye week prepping for Nebraska, as they'll have about a week and a half until they play that game. So the whole offensive line battle needs to be won here in the next couple days. And we won't know much more about that until game day. But you have to imagine that they have to make a real decision here coming up soon. The final thing I saw at practice was it was great to see Chris Autman-Bell make some contact catches, including a touchdown catch in the 7-on-7 period with a guy draped all over him, just to see him getting back into game speed, getting back into contact, and I absolutely love it. Now, speaking of Chris Autman-Bell, I want to talk about the wide receiver room, because it's very possible that this is the best wide receiver room we've seen in the Coach Fleck era. Now, that's saying something, because in 2019, you had a room with Rashad Bateman, Tyler Johnson, and Chris Autman-Bell. But now you've got an improved Chris Autman-Bell since then. He showed very early last year before he got injured that he was ready to be the alpha wide receiver, ready to take over, ready to do big things when it mattered most. So you've got that type of crab back on top of Daniel Jackson, who led the team in receiving yards last season. And I truly think that since I saw him in that bowl game to the spring, I was like, man, he looks like he's just come alive. He's making big time plays. He looks like he could be a wide receiver one. Then you head into the fall camp and I'm like, he still looks like he's continuing to gain confidence, to make impressive catches. And I think Daniel Jackson is a real one. I think he's going to impress a lot of people across the conference. And then on top of those two players, you've got two transfers coming in that have both been named to the Biletnikoff watch list, which is the award given to the best receiver in college football each and every season. So two watch list guys coming in with Crab, with Daniel Jackson. That's 4 strong. And then you've got Le'Meke Brockington, who in my opinion doesn't get discussed enough. He doesn't get enough love of the bunch of the 5 receivers we've just mentioned now. And I think he's likely to see the 3rd best defensive back coverage in most sets. So he should have opportunities to expose weaknesses, to have the big time plays that we've been seeing in the spring and in this fall camp. I really think he is going to particularly shock opposing teams because his confidence has only grown and he has that consistent deep threat in the room. Now that's 5 players deep, likely to maybe see high double-digit snaps in 2023. This room has talent, check. Upside, check. Burners, check. Contested catching, check. And route runners that can separate, check. All of that in this room across 5 wide receivers, and you've still got high potential and youth waiting in the wings in Kenrick Lanier, Christian Hoskins, and some more guys up next. So it absolutely still has to be proven on the field, but I do believe this could end up as the most talented wide receiver room that Coach Fleck has had across the board in his time with Minnesota. Now, with all of that talent, how will the room shake out in 2023? How will the snaps play out, the targets play out? We're going to take our best guess at what the target distribution could be for those leading 5 receivers coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about a new friend of the show, Nutrafol. Now, men think consistently that losing their hair is inevitable. Take control of your hair's future with Nutrafol's science-backed hair growth supplement for men. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth, visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. And it works. There are clinical studies that had 84% of men showing improvement in their hair after 6 months of taking Nutrafol's men's hair growth supplements. So take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For the limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners here at Locked On Golden Gophers $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Find out why more than 4,000 healthcare professionals recommended Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men. That's Nutrafol.com/men and enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's Nutrafol.com/men. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, Gophers fans, so we're breaking down the depth chart in the wide receiver room. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking tight ends, and you know what? It is going to be a great show for Gophers fans, especially as we rank the tight ends in the Big Ten. But today is wide receivers, and it's still a good day for Gophers fans. These 2 areas seem to be high strengths for the Gophers when it comes to those positions. Now, I've got Minnesota set for around 350 passing attempts in the 2023 season. That might sound like a lot, but it's only 30 more passing attempts than what we saw in 2019, and that 2019 team still wasn't in the top 100 when it came to passing attempts. So I do think there's going to be a shift. I've talked about that on the show time and time again. Now, it's not going to be a dramatic shift. It's not going to be a drastic shift, but I think it's going to be about 60% run, maybe 40% pass, or really close, give or take 2%. And so I've got Minnesota set for 350 passing attempts just for this quick thought on how the targets could break down in the 2023 season. Now, in 2019, I said you had 320 passing attempts in 2019, and yet you had 119 targets going to Tyler Johnson, 95 targets going to Rashad Bateman, and then 43 targets going to Chris Autman-Bell. That was the bulk of the wide receiver targets in that season. Now, the top end in this 2023 season probably won't see that high end of 119, almost 100 targets in the top two receivers. I think it'll be a little bit lower than that. But I also think the back end of the receiver room in year 4 and year 5 will see closer to that lower end that Chris Autman-Bell saw in the 2019 season. So it gives you a lot more condensed room when it comes to target splits, but a lot of guys seeing a lot of options. So when we move into this thing, I think the starters from snap one, when they line up there and they get into their first snap, you will probably see Daniel Jackson on the outside, Chris Autman-Bell on the outside, and Corey Crooms in the slot. Now, Daniel Jackson, I think will see the most targets on the year when it comes to the Gophers in 2023. I've got him pinned at about 70 targets. Now, last year he had 58 targets, so it's still an upgrade from his receiving yard leading season in the last year. Now, Daniel Jackson is a player that's got downfield routes. He's got outs. He's got comebacks. He's got curls. They use him in a lot of different ways. A lot of work on the outside for him, but he also has the flexibility and versatility to move into the slot as well. Now, Daniel Jackson could surprise many people, but I would not be surprised if this man leads the room in receiving yards once again. I think the most wow moments, the most how did he do that moments are going to come from Daniel Jackson in this wide receivers room. Now, he can go and he can win contested catches and he can separate with his route running, so he brings a lot of strengths to this wide receiver room. The next wide receiver we're going to talk about is Chris Autman-Bell. I have him projected at about 60 targets. This still would be a career high for him, I believe, or very close to it. And he's probably the best jump ball contested catch receiver in this room. He can go up there and win with the best of them. I don't care who's guarding him. He can get in there and fight for the ball. We've seen that time and time again with him with the Minnesota Gophers during his time here with Minnesota. And he also finds a lot of success across the middle on crossing routes. His number of targets, though, was the hardest to determine for me because I just don't know if the Gophers are going to take more of a slower ramp up into the season, and especially in those earlier weeks, and let him kind of find his ground coming back from the injury, or if he'll have shown enough in the camp to be like, okay, yeah, he feels good. We want to let him go. Let's let him run. That's why it makes it a little bit more difficult. I wouldn't be surprised to see Chris Autman-Bell get more targets than this. But right now, I've got him placed comfortably at about 60 targets. Then that other starter that I mentioned was Corey Crooms. I think he's starting in the slot, and he's going to play a lot of slot reps. Now, Corey Crooms, I've got pinned at 50 targets. That's quite a difference than what he saw at Western Michigan. But I think he understands and he sees the talent of this room and what this team could be. So I don't see frustrations or anger or problems coming from quite a drop in targets. I think he is going to be a very useful piece, a very talented piece in the slot. And you know what? We haven't really had consistency from the slot over the last couple of years. The only player that's really seen consistency coming out of the slot is when they move tight end Brevin Spanford to the slot. So Corey Crooms will give us a lot to work with. And I've also seen him in these last couple fall practices move to the outside as well. So he brings versatility. He brings a little bit of speed element to him as well. And he brings a lot of veteran knowledge, a lot of veteran experience, knowing how to sit in a hole, knowing how to create extra separation at the point of the break. So I think Corey Crooms is going to be a big addition for this room, even if he doesn't see the same amount of targets as last year or more targets than 50 on the season. Now, next up for me are Le'Meke Brockington and Elijah Spencer. I think both of them are going to see a heavy amount of targets, a heavy amount of snaps, and be rotated in with these guys early and often. I think you're going to see a rotation with these 5 receivers. They're going to get a lot of playing time on the season. Now, I've got Elijah Spencer at around 65 targets. Now, he plays a similar role to Chris Autman-Bell, but maybe not as much jump ball contested catch type of receiver, but he has the best release package off the line of scrimmage on the entire team, in my opinion. Now, he mainly plays outside for Minnesota, but he's great. He does fantastic work in the slants, in the crossers, in the post routes. And I think 2023 could be a year where he kind of has some absolute blow up games and you're like, holy cow, this kid has got something special. And then I think he can have some quieter outings due to the depth and due to the versatility and having other wide receivers that'll step up for certain games. But that being said, with Brev Spanford gone next year, with Chris Autman-Bell gone next year, and with Corey Crooms gone next year, if Elijah Spencer returns in 2024, I think that could be the year that he goes absolutely nuclear. You heard it here first. Remember to write that down. Hit bookmark on Twitter or whatever you got to do. But I'm telling you right now, if he's back in 2024, I think he is going to absolutely dominate in the Big Ten Conference. And then we've got Le'Meke Brockington, the fifth of those five receivers. I think he's going to see a lot of snaps. I think you're going to see him moving all over the field and seeing him used in different manners. He's quick, he's strong, he high points the ball, and we've seen multiple breakaway routes with him and crossing routes. He can play inside, he can play outside. He brings a lot to this room that maybe others don't bring. And that target distribution with all these guys, I think Le'Meke Brockington probably has the most explosion plays. I think he has the most maybe breakaway touchdowns of this group. But overall, they all bring something different to the room. And that is key for this Gophers team because they should have opportunities on any given play to have somebody come open quickly. And I think you're going to see a lot of quick passing routes this year. You're going to see a lot of quick movements. So I think this wide receivers room is going to be something special. Now that target distribution that I just gave you with Le'Meke with 40, Elijah Spencer with 65, Corey Crooms with 50, Chris Autman-Bell with 60, and Daniel Jackson with 70. That still leaves you about 50 to 60 targets for Brevin Spanford with some more sprinkled in for young guys like Christian Hoskins with Nick Callerup and others. So the future, like I already have mentioned, I think Elijah Spencer and Daniel Jackson will be huge in 2024. Brockington will take another step up in 2024, and we've got some real nice talent in there. But I think after that, the first two up in this year, if any injuries were to happen, but also in 2024 for more opportunities, you'll see Christian Hoskins, who may be the fastest, actually probably is the fastest wide receiver on the team. He could be more incorporated. You could still see him this year. I think you'll see more creative usage in the slot with Christian Hoskins. You'll see special packages built for Christian Hoskins, but the lead slot role is his for the taking in 2024 and his time to shine. You'll see bubbles, you'll see sweeps, you'll see deep shots, you'll see drags, and he adds a whole different element to this room. And then the other receiver of note in that kind of next up category, both for next year and if anybody were to go down to injury, is Kendrick Lanier. This kid's going to be special. He's really clicking as a true freshman really quickly. He's an early enrollee. He is sure-handed. He can win the jump ball. He's got a ton of potential, and he has impressed the coaches. I've heard multiple positive remarks from Coach Fleck, from Coach Simon, from Crab, and others on Lanier. He definitely will find more opportunities in 2024, though he could see some time on the field, maybe up to 4 games this year. But I think they're going to do everything they can to hold on to his red shirt for this season. Now, the depth continues at wide receiver. I think Dino Kaliak-Manis and Quentin Redding will both travel on the 2 deep. Dino is a hard worker, sure-handed, does whatever is asked of him on this team. Prior to the 2 major transfer additions, I thought maybe he could make a push for snaps and being a dependable, sure-handed, hard worker, kind of like Clay Geary, what we've seen for him in his time with Minnesota. But this room might be a little bit too deep for that in 2023. But I think he'll contribute on special teams a lot in this upcoming season. And then you've got Quentin Redding. I don't think we'll see any wide receiver snaps from him in the 2023 year, barring a blowout or something. But I think he'll be the lead returner in 2023 with Christian Hoskins as the number 2 returner. And then other guys to keep in mind for future years, Nuke Hayes, TJ McWilliams, both true freshmen, both coming in for the first time in fall. Got to get ramped up. I think both are definitely redshirt players who could see future opportunities. And then, as always, I got to shout out the grinders, the walk-ons, the Zach Jorgensen, Cade Osterman, and Cade Kunzamias. I think all of those guys, I appreciate the work they do. They are the culture. They are the scout looks, and it's built upon those guys like walk-ons who put in all their effort, who put it out all the work, and they put it out there and bust their tail to help their team in any way. Now we're going to move on real quick, and we're going to talk about the top receiving rooms in the Big Ten. I almost said top 10, but we're going beyond the top 10. We're doing the entire Big Ten and our rankings for the room coming up next to close out this show. All right, Gophers fans, so we are talking the rankings across the Big Ten with the wide receiver rooms, and we're going to kick it off with number 14. Now, like I said, in the last two shows where we've done quarterbacks and running backs, this is my projections rankings for how the year will finish out. So these are how I think it shakes out when it comes to the 2023 season being over and done with. And we kick it off with number 14, and guess who it is once again? It's Rutgers. Now, if you're over on YouTube, you can see the updated list continuing to scroll along the bottom of the screen, and I encourage you to hit subscribe while you're over there. But Rutgers, at this point, it feels like I'm just bashing Rutgers, but I really do believe this offense is going to struggle, and I'm not sure who they will turn to for any ounce of upside. You move over to 13, and I've got Purdue coming in at 13. They've got Marshawn Rice back. They've got TJ Sheffield back, but neither really instill much confidence for me when it comes to 2023. They can be fine, but I don't see that high-end upside, that difference maker upside from them. I wouldn't be surprised to see Purdue lean into a more run-heavy approach while they possibly build up their recruiting class and guys that they are looking for the future of their system. Then you move on to number 12, and I've got Michigan State. Now, Michigan State had a ton of departures. They were absolutely rampaged by the portal when it came to their wide receiver room. And I think that's why they fall in here at 12. Now, they do have some guys like Tyrell Henry, that Antonio Gates Jr., the son of the NFL legend, who could step up, but both of those guys are relative unknowns, and they will have to rely on young faces. I just don't know if they can get it done. Plus, we have the unknown of their quarterback. It's too many unknowns for me to put them any higher than 12. We move on to number 11, and number 11 is Northwestern. They've got a decent quarterback with experience, but the wide receivers are still unproven. The mainstays for this Northwestern offense will likely be transfers coming in AJ Henning coming from Michigan, Cam Johnson coming from Arizona State. They'll probably have the most opportunities, but how much will they capitalize? It's a huge question, and it's why I've got them at 11. Then you've got number 10. I've got Indiana. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Indiana's wide receiver room. I'm not going to pretend to. I didn't have to dive too far into the breakdowns for Indiana because the Gophers don't play him, so I didn't look too much into him. But I know Cam Camper, and I know he is an absolute talent, and he is a dog, which gives me more confidence to put this group in there at 10 because they've got at least one guy that's a go-to and others that can spread around him to contribute. Number 9. I've got Nebraska, the Cornhuskers. It's a little low, but it's because of all the changes that have happened as of late. Now, if you had asked me 3 weeks ago, they probably would have been in my top 7. But with Xavier Betts no longer with the team, true freshman Malachi Coleman, who I think is an absolute talent out there, got hurt. And then on top of that, Marcus Washington is also ailing. I couldn't put Nebraska any higher than 9 because I don't know if those are injuries that'll linger, that could pop back up, and they lost a really big piece in Betts. So if the room was what it was 3 weeks ago, they'd be higher, but I can't do it. They're not in the top 7. They're at number 9. But Kemp brings some versatility and interest to that room. Then you move on to number 8, and number 8 is Iowa. Now, Iowa comes in at number 8 for me because Caleb Brown can be a difference maker. It sounds like he was absolutely shining in their kind of fall scrimmages as of late. The transfer was popping up left and right and making plays. He's transferred from Ohio State and has shown out very quickly in the fall. His talent and anticipated production helps get them to 8 for me. And then you've got Nico Regini as well, who should be at least sufficient to contribute like he has the past couple of years. You move on to number 7, and number 7, I've got the Illinois Fighting Illini. Their top 3 wide receivers, or 3 of their top 4 wide receivers from last year in production, are all back with the team. Isaiah Williams, Pat Bryant, and Casey Washington. Now, Isaiah could be an NFL-type wide receiver. He has field IQ. He has played the quarterback position at the D1 level. And so I think he sees the field a little bit different, and he brings a nice talent. But I'm not sure their upside matches the talent or the upside of the rooms that I put above them. So they come in right at 7. Now, number 6 for me is the Michigan Wolverines. Now, this is tough. I truly think rankings 3 through 6, you could have them in any which order, and I would believe you, because there's a lot of unknowns and question marks, but high upside talent in the rooms paired with some production. You've got Cornelius Johnson with Michigan, who could be the number one, he has the most production coming back to this team. And they've also got Roman Wilson, who has shown to do some things on that football field. But I think the biggest thing that puts a question mark around Michigan, and maybe they're 6, maybe they're 4, maybe they're 3, is their redshirt freshman from last year. Darius Clemens, Tyler Morris, both of those guys could be big time, and Coach Harbaugh talked about them a ton last season and how special they might be, how they're the most talented receivers he's worked with in the recruiting class coming in, like in any of the recruiting classes that he's had. So there's a lot of upside in there, but we have to see it turn into production before I can move them up any higher. Number 5, I've got Wisconsin. They've got DK, they've got Bell, and they bring consistency and production to this Wisconsin room. But having a more air raid style offense, you're going to need a lot of producers. They've got Keontez Lewis as well from 2022, who showed signs of life, but the upside truly lies in how the transfers show out. You've got CJ Williams coming from USC, Bryson Green, who's coming from Oklahoma State, and then they've got Purding coming from Cincinnati with Fickle. They all bring more depth and more hands to this room, but will they produce? Will they step up? Will they be ready immediately in 2023, or will it take more time? The only one that has real production is Bryson Green. So we'll see if those new elements shine and step up and push them to a higher ranking, or if they come in at this 5 like I projected. Number 4 for me is Penn State. I debated putting them at 3, but I just locked it in and went with the gut. Keandre Lambert-Smith looks like he's going to be the focal point in this wide receiver room, and he brings speed in the top end to this room. Then you've got Dante Cephas, who transferred in from Kent State. He had a 1,200-yard season over at Kent State in his time there at one point, and he will be a mainstay. And then you've got young players that could really shine, like an Amari Evans, who's a sophomore, like a redshirt freshman, and Caden Saunders, who bring a ton of potential. But again, it's potential. We need to see it realized. There's also more depth in this Penn State room as well, than maybe more than a Wisconsin, more than a Michigan, which is why I put them in at number 4. You kick it off to number 3. That's right. The Gophers are in the top 3, but they're not number 3. Maryland is number 3. Now, they have a vet who's used to the system in Jayshon Jones, plus 2 major transfers coming in Caden Prather from West Virginia, who had over 500 yards receiving, and then Tyrese Chambers, who comes from FIU, and in his past 2 years with FIU, he's had 1,600 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns, and a whole lot of production. He brings speed, he brings quick cuts, he brings fast feet, and I think he's going to be a big-time player for Maryland and their quarterback, Tagovailoa. So Maryland comes in at number 3. But number 2 is your Minnesota Gophers. That's right. I've got the Gophers at number 2. The depth, the experience, and the talent give me major confidence in this Minnesota wide receivers group. It's probably the most talented wide receiver room, like I said, to open up the show. And even Phil Steele has the Minnesota Gophers ranked as his top 3 unit in the Big Ten when it comes to the wide receivers themselves. So I think they're a step above Maryland. I think they've got more depth and more upside to their receivers, and I think we just need to see it more realized. But you've got the actual production we've seen on the field in Crab, in Jackson, and then Elijah Spencer and Kerms both come in with a ton of experience as transfers. So you've got a whole lot of experience and talent, and Minnesota comes in at 2. But number 1 is none other than the Ohio State Buckeyes. Hands down, no contest, easy answer, lock it in. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in the entire country, which helps vault them. But then you've got Emeka Egbuka, who is not very far behind. Julian Fleming, who is a senior, but he's a sure-handed wide receiver 3 who gets over 500 yards often. And then you've got Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss, and Noah Rogers, all of the true freshman class, all waiting in the wings, ready to absolutely pop off in 2024. So Ohio State wraps it up. That's going to do it for us on today's show. I hope you enjoyed the wide receiver rankings. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know what wide receiver on the Gophers roster you are most intrigued by. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to hear it. And tomorrow we're talking tight ends. I'll see you then. Roll the boat, Sky Hima, go Gophers. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.